Here to talk to us about digital economies, please welcome YatSiu from Animoca Brands and from Money 2020, Rebecca Martin.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome to the best session of the day. I'm very excited to be joined by Yat on stage, a serial entrepreneur who learned to code at the age of 9, has built several businesses in the US and in Hong Kong, most recently Animoca. Some impressive stats there too. So 800 gaming brands, investments in over 200 startups, and now 12 blockchain or 18 blockchain projects. But most importantly, Yat is born and bred in Vienna. And this is the first time Yat is back speaking in Austria. So welcome Yat home, guys.
So thank you. Servus Wien. It's special being here. I grew up in Vienna, so this is sort of my home and original birth town. But I haven't been back for a while. You know, I left here almost like more than 3 decades ago. So the very first thing I did before I came here to the conference was I wanted to check whether Trzeznevsky was still around, and it was. So I had some bread pieces and came here. I was very happy that it was still there after like 3 or 4 or 5 decades. So.
Nice. The session before us was talking about how social media and blockchain might come together. I heard that at the end. And we're here to talk about how content is evolving and maybe converging with blockchain technology.
Right.
So please start by telling us how you see content evolving alongside this technology.
So I think when you look at, the topic was around why Bill Gates was right? So. And he coined a term over like 25 years ago where he said content was king. And what he meant by that was that when the internet came around in '96, the awesome power of this distribution network, it allowed for everyone to be a content creator. And therefore, there was no longer exclusivity about being a creator. So content would be king. But what happened was that because content was so pervasive, the problem wasn't good content, the problem was discovery. Because the internet made distribution cheap and free. And as a result, content creators were cheated out of their, let's call it just rewards. And you can see that today, you don't actually have content being king. There's no Game of Thrones if it's not for HBO. There's no, if you look at Spotify, they control music, and the same is true for games. So content is not king. And I think Jonathan Perelman sort of phrased it nicely. He said, content may be king, but actually distribution is the queen and she wears the pants.
And how do non-fungible tokens come into this vision of content? Who here knows what a non-fungible token is? Or in fact, what fungible means?
I see one or two hands. Well, maybe a very super fast 10-second explanation on this is a sort of a non-fungible token. Obviously, the opposite of a fungible token is it is something that is unique. When you think about fungible, like Bitcoin, I can exchange it, just like the US dollar. $1 is $1, $5, $5. It can be exchanged all over the world. But a non-fungible token could be perhaps better explained as a piece of art, as an example. It's unique. There is attributes about it that is rare and is, in fact, either 1 of 5, 1 of 10, and you can't copy it. Right? And the example here about non-fungible tokens in the blockchain world is the most famous one is probably CryptoKitties, a project that we're also involved in. And for those of you who've heard of CryptoKitties, it brought the Ethereum network on its knees over a year ago. Most expensive cat was sold for like over 140,000 US dollars. And a lot of people ask this question, why would you pay so much money for a digital cat just because it's unique? And the example I like to give to people on this one is that in the old world of sort of digital, everything was a copy. Right? So if I used something online, it wasn't unique. It was a copy of it. But with non-fungible tokens, you can make each item scarce, and you can save the provenance of the item. Perfect example in real world is this cup. If I use this cup and I sold it to you, it's probably worth $1. But if Mick Jagger owned this cup, it's probably worth a lot more. But the utility is exactly the same. It's still a cup. You still drink from it. But the provenance of the cup is now recorded on the blockchain. And that means it has implications for things like, for instance, esports. The sword that won the championship, the gun that basically killed 60 levels of 60 monsters. And it also means that it's permanent because of the blockchain. That means items that you played with as a child, you can maybe hand over to your own children, right? It's permanent. It's a legacy that you can now maintain in the digital world.
This is something we were talking about earlier, the concept that I could hand down a digital sword to my grandchildren that I've been building up my digital ownership with. And how do these non-fungible tokens, so this concept of having a scarce good, a digital good in a game, how is that evolving the way that content is then developed? And how do you see that forming what you see as the vision for the future of gaming?
Well, not just gaming, but we think gaming is the first frontier to do it because everyone, gamers understand virtual currency and they also understand sort of digital items and ownership. So it's easy to do that for them to understand it. But where we see the future is around digital ownership as a form of value. It means that games will change. Right now, games are just made for fun, right? And you enjoy them and that's great. But when you play a game, there's no concept of building value. Right? But now with non-fungible tokens, actually you can start building and playing games and actually maybe earning money from it. Right? And you can actually gain from the playtime that you have because the items you generate could be worth something. When you talk about scarcity, the example is, let's say there's only 100 swords in that one game. It means that if you wanted that sword, you have to buy it from the player. That's different. You don't just buy it from the company who you pay money to. You now have to buy it from the player that owns it. Much like a piece of art or a piece of item that you currently possess, you can sell it to someone else, which means that every player becomes a participant in that digital economy. And we think that will revolutionize the way that we look at digital items and ownership.
And talk a bit about how that ownership, that token, has a life cycle beyond the first game that it's invented in.
Well, because it's on the blockchain, and in this case there's different standards, but ERC 721 is sort of, at this point, the most popular one, you're able to have a digital item, and it's permanent. It stays forever. You can use it in another game or in another way if you want, even if the game shuts down. Today, games are walled gardens, right? If you play Fortnite, that's great, but if Fortnite shuts down, you lose everything, right? Think of all the games you may have played as a child. You don't own anything in that game. Right? It's a little bit like you going to Uniqlo and you're buying clothes. And when Uniqlo shuts down, your clothes disappear. Now, that doesn't make sense in the real world, but somehow in the gaming world, that's become acceptable. And in fact, what should really happen is that these items should be permanent. They should stay with you. And that also means that when you have communities where you're building these digital items, that if they're very large, someone else can decide to actually use these items and make their own game. The example I can give here is like tennis rackets. If a community in the city has 1 million people who play tennis, you're naturally going to have a lot of tennis courts emerge, right? And the same will be with games. If there's a community, whether it's World of Warcraft or whether it's Fortnite, has millions of people and they have these permanent items on the blockchain, there's going to be thousands of companies, if not tens of thousands, who will use these items in their own games. It will be a completely different way of designing this sort of virtual world.
Let's talk a bit about what that means on a practical level. So how far along are Animoca, or your companies, your 800 brands in gaming, how far along are you in developing these non-fungible tokens within games?
Well, I mean, the most famous example with CryptoKitties is, in the beginning when CryptoKitties came out, I mean, it was $25 million worth of transactions. Right? That was obviously sort of a beginning of that. But today, the dApp space is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's still early. Right? One thing to remember is that in the blockchain space, we're still only talking about 30 million wallets. Right? That means there's only 30 million real active participants in the blockchain world. So you could say that's really small, that's super early. However, the thing to consider is that in 96, 97, there were also only 36 million internet connections. And that was a time when Amazon and sort of Yahoo and SoftBank and all these companies emerged. There were only 36 million of them. And like today, when you want to enter the world of blockchain, it's difficult. You have to set up MetaMask, you set up a wallet, it's like forget it, right? And back then, it was dial-up connections, right? You had to basically understand TCP/IP and DNS and buy a modem. So we're at the same stage, we think. So we think that in 2 or 3 years, this space is going to explode. And the reason we believe that is because the proposition for the consumer, just like the internet, is so powerful. Like if you have a choice to play a game where you own nothing, or you play the same game but you owned everything, not only just in terms of selling it or you could make money, but actually you owned it and could pass it down and so on, you would naturally choose the game where you owned everything, we think.
Do you think we'll start to see more financial services products integrated into the gaming world? Will we go beyond the concept of token ownership? Will we get a fully virtual bank that's built within a gaming environment?
Absolutely. I mean, games already are virtual economies today, if you think about it. Especially the online MMORPGs have a kind of economy. The problem about their economies is it's very inflation-driven. If the company needs to make more money, it issues more coins. It's a little bit like the Venezuelan economy, right? Which, as we know, doesn't last too long. And then when the game sort of implodes because the economy isn't sustainable, they shut down the game and start a new one. In the real world, it's like a revolution, right? So that's not sustainable, right? But when you change that concept where you have fixed supply or where you have scarcity in items, where the users, as in the players, become active participants of this world, we think it has a completely different life cycle of sustainability.
And what does this mean for private companies, for commercial businesses that are maybe threatened by the way that this technology is evolving?
Well, I think it's a paradigm shift, right? And if you think about it, what non-fungible tokens do for digital items is a little bit like what open source did to code, or what user-generated content did for, let's say, actually proprietary content, right? Nobody imagined how YouTube would change the world of user-generated content. Or nobody thought that when Linux first really pushed it and the GNU public standard came out and did open source, that suddenly there would be a sort of intellectual property revolution in terms of code creation. Because when you open it up to the wider community, new and fascinating things happen. But of course, think about open source. Who resisted open source? Companies like IBM and Microsoft, right? They resisted it because they were able to control that closed source, and now you would bust it open for everyone to see. But if it was not busted open, we wouldn't have all these startups, we wouldn't have all this innovation. And we think the same is going to happen for digital ownership.
Before we came on stage, I asked you what the most provocative question was that I could ask you. And you talked about the ethical issues in developing new technologies. Tell us about child labor.
So, yeah, when you asked me this question, the first reference that I was thinking of is in the virtual world, when you're playing a game, your physical strength, your age does not matter, right? So in the classical world, you were stronger, and therefore you had dominion over your children in a way. But in the virtual world, I would challenge most of you to play with a 9 or 10-year-old in a game of Fortnite, and you're likely to lose, right? Or Minecraft, or name the game, right? And that's the word's different. And in a world where digital ownership will make money, what does that mean? It means that an 8 or 9-year-old can maybe make more money than you as a 40-year-old, for instance. And they will know more about that than you do. And we've already seen some of that, right? If you look at Ryan the Unboxer on YouTube for user-generated content, he made $22 million at 7 years of age. The last female world champion in drone racing is a Thai girl who's 8 years of age, right? And the esports champion, like the last esports champion was of a team with like a $5 million prize money, and one of the participants was 13 or 14 years of age. And you're going to see a lot more of that happening, right? And so that also means that our relationship with our children has to change as well. Much like teachers are frustrated when they look at kids using Google and Wikipedia and coming to class apparently knowing more. Now you're going to have children that might be making more money than you, or actually being more skilled at this particular labor. And it will be a different kind of revolution, I think, than we have already seen.
So your own children will be coming soon for your job.
Well, I'm looking forward to the day that actually my kids can start making money, soon.
All right, we're out of time, but last question. How many crypto kitties do you own?
Oh, I have about 800.
800?
Yes,
wow.
But there's millions of them, so that's a very small number.
Okay,
yeah.
If you want to talk to Yat about that afterwards, come and find him. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yat and Rebecca. Fascinating stuff.